In the News, sponsored by AIM, the Associated Industries of Massachusetts, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association, NAIOP, and Denterline. I'm RD Sahl, Senior Advisor at Denterline. And our In the News interview guest, is Evan Falchuk, the United Independent Party candidate for Governor of Massachusetts. Thanks very much for spending some time with us.
Great to be with you, RD.
What have you learned about politics and campaigning by being a candidate?
It's a remarkable process. You meet so many people, and what I try to do is to get into real, meaningful conversations with them. People feel like the system today is not representing them. That's the top line issue of what I hear every day all across the Commonwealth. And it's troubling because we have serious issues that we need to deal with. And the sense of anxiety that voters feel about the direction things are heading in is what is motivating this campaign, which is to me about challenging the establishment and building a new framework that can actually connect with voters and represent what truly matters to them in their lives.
Every new governor has to submit a strategic economic development policy statement. Key elements in yours, and how do we measure it?
We need to lower the cost of living in Massachusetts. So healthcare costs is my number one priority. Today we're in a world in which the monopolistic consolidation of hospitals, partners buying South Shore Hospital, is a symptom of a much deeper problem that's happening in our economy. When they consolidate and get bigger, they raise their prices. They act like monopolists. And our state is supposed to stop those kinds of concentrations of power and to make sure that they're not taking money out of the pockets of consumers in the way that they are. Now, this consolidation started in the 90s under a Republican administration. It's continuing today under a Democratic one. It needs to stop. There should not be mergers of hospitals like this, and we need to be implementing something that they're doing right now in Maryland, which is a fee schedule for hospital services that can start to get rid of some of the distorting market practices that the hospitals are engaged in. If we could get rid of just 5% of the wasted expense in hospitals, and most studies think that there's a lot more waste than just 5% in hospitals, that's $2 billion a year that goes right back into the pockets of consumers and businesses. That has to be the top priority because it is the thing that's hurting so many families, so many businesses, so many municipalities across the state as they pay for healthcare costs. The second priority has to do with housing production. And all the great economic studies will tell you that you're not going to get the kind of sustained economic growth we need if we don't kickstart the housing market. There's been an effort to have some zoning reform in the legislature, but we need a much bigger policy about housing production. And we've put out a Thriving Communities Action Plan that you can read about on the Falchuk2014.org website, which describes how we can start to unlock that potential. And it's by funding education for cities and towns properly. As it is today, cities and towns create all kinds of rules so that what we used to call starter homes don't get built because the cities and towns are worried that people with children are going to move into their communities and they can't afford to educate the children in those communities because of the funding for education has been dropping so much over the last decade. We need to reverse that completely and to build a framework to allow for lots more housing production. Now, that's a real, serious, modern, pro-growth plan. What we don't see in the political process today is much else besides let's cut taxes, let's try to reduce the size of government, let's come up with some magical formula, not very specific, clear, measurable things that can make a real difference in helping to grow our economy.
Job creation, your plan for lowering that 5.6% unemployment rate.
Yeah, look, small business is what drives economic growth in the 21st century. A lot of our policies around job creation are geared towards an economy that doesn't exist anymore. It's geared towards tax breaks to large politically influential businesses or regulatory systems that are friendly to those businesses as opposed to saying what matters to a small business. Now, I can say as a person who helped grow a small business into what I would call a medium-sized business, it's all about the cost of living and the cost of doing business. So if it is more expensive to hire employees in Massachusetts, then it is easier for a business to hire them outside of Massachusetts. If it is more expensive to start a business in Massachusetts and people don't have the money in their pockets to be able to take the risk of starting a business, they won't do it. Our system today is set up in a way that if you were designing a program that makes it harder for small businesses to grow, you'd have a lot of the policies we have today in Massachusetts.
Let me stick with job creation for a moment. We hear Massachusetts employers and businesses say there's a skills gap. We can't find the trained workers we need for the openings we have to fill. How would you close that gap?
This is an area where the government does have a role to play because so much job training is either funded by or facilitated by the state. and I've talked to businesses out in the western part of Massachusetts that are in manufacturing that can't find those skilled workers. What we've seen happen just in this last legislative session were many job training programs that did not get the funding that they need in order to be effective. So when employers are talking about the lack of skilled workers to do those jobs, and we have government programs that are designed to provide those skilled workers to those employers, but the money doesn't get placed there, there's something wrong with our priorities. Now, what struck me, RD, in this last legislative session is right at the end, they passed a bill to borrow $1 billion to fund the construction of the convention center in downtown Boston. The expansion of it is already a pretty huge place. And there were some arguments for it, I guess, but these were never really fully tested and vetted, and there weren't hearings on this issue to really get into the details of what's happening. Well, I'd rather take a significant portion of that money and gear it towards more job training, more public-private partnerships to help make sure that those small businesses and medium-sized businesses that are looking for good skilled workers can find them.